Okay, so we're through the hard part. Now all we have to do is the ureters and the urinary bladder and the urethra. Not at all difficult. So the ureters, so remember we are really done producing urine now. We're just about getting it out of the body. The ureters are going to leave at the hilum, right? And which is around L2 level. They are usually about 10 inches long. Generally speaking, the right one is a little lower, and therefore the right kidney is a little lower, and therefore the ureter is a little shorter. That's just because of how the liver sits in there. And since the kidneys start out retroperitoneal, so do the ureters. And they run retroperitoneal until about the sacroiliac joint, which you're seeing right here. And then they dip into the abdominopelvic cavity. So they were retroperitoneal, and then they go inside the abdominopelvic cavity as they run toward the urinary bladder. And they enter the urinary bladder on the posterior lateral surface. So this is an anterior view of the urinary bladder, and they're going to come in on the back side of the urinary bladder. As far as the tissue layers, that you find, the tissue layers, they are going to be lined with transitional epithelium. Remember, we learned this at the beginning of the semester. And the transitional epithelium is going to have tight junctions because we've got waste in there and we don't want it to leak back out. And then they're going to have connective tissue, which is called the lamina propria. You don't have to know that name though. And then they are going to have smooth muscle in their wall in a muscularis layer. And then on the outside, they're going to not have a serous membrane. They're going to have connective tissue because they're actually sort of woven into the tissues that are beside them. And they do help move the urine by peristalsis, the muscle in their wall does. And that means that urine can move from your kidneys to your urinary bladder, even if you are laying down or standing on your head. They're still going to move from the kidneys to the urinary bladder. Okay. Then our urinary bladder. So the urinary bladder is a collapsible muscular sac. When it's full, it can hold about a pint. And when it's empty, it really kind of flattens onto into the pelvic cavity. So it's almost spherical when it's full, and it sits on the pubic symphysis. And its job is really just to store urine and then expel urine when you want to. It has internally the openings to both of the ureters, but they actually run along the backside and they open near the bottom third. And then, of course, it's got the opening to the urethra as well. These three openings form a little triangle, which is called the trigon. And the trigon in some people is relatively deep. When it's relatively deep, sometimes it is a common site for persistent urinary tract infections. As far as the histology, it's not going to be surprising. It's transitional epithelium again. It also has tight junctions. A layer of connective tissue underneath, and then smooth muscle in the wall, and then connective tissue on the outside because it's actually woven into all the tissue down there in the pelvic cavity. The layers of the smooth muscle in the wall, it's actually much thicker than it is in the ureters. So collectively, all three of these layers are called the detrusor muscle. The detrusor muscle. It is smooth muscle though. As far as innervation of the urinary bladder has autonomic motor innervation and then visceral sensory innervation. The autonomic motor innervation, sympathetic and parasympathetic, and the visceral sensory is going to respond primarily to stretch. And you know that your urinary bladder can hurt when it gets really full. Okay, and then last but not least, we will lead to the urethra. And the urethra differs in males and females because, of course, in females, the external urethral orifice is relatively close to the urinary bladder, and in males, the external urethral orifice is at the tip of the penis. So the function of the urethra, the urinary function of the urethra, is to drain urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. You have two sphincters that are sort of guarding the urethra. The first one is a smooth muscle sphincter that's on the same place in males and females, and it's called the internal urethral sphincter. And its job is to prevent dribbling of urine from the urinary bladder into the urethra. It's smooth muscle, it's involuntary. The sympathetic nervous system causes it to close. Okay, parasympathetic nervous system will cause it to open. Then, as you move into the urethra itself, as far as the tissue layers go, transitional epithelium the whole way, lining it in females. In males, it will change, not shown in this picture. About mid-urethra in males, it will change to pseudostratified columnar, sometimes also just called stratified columnar. It's a unique tissue. And both types of tissues have mucin producing capabilities. So when you mix mucin with water, you get mucus. Then you are going to have smooth muscle also in the urethra. Toward the distal end of the urethra, the smooth muscle is gone in males. And then the external urethral sphincter is in the same place in males and females as well. So the external urethral sphincter is in the skeletal muscle diaphragm, not this one, but the skeletal muscle that forms the pelvic floor. And it is a skeletal muscle sphincter. And you spend the first few years of your life trying to get control of it, and sometimes you lose control of it at the end. It is voluntary, and it's controlled by the somatic nervous system, and this is your potty training muscle, and it's way up here, okay? And then the sex differences in the urethra in the males and females. On average, a female urethra is about 1.5 inches long. The external urethral orifice is between the vagina and the clitoris. The female urethra in a typical anatomical female will carry only urine. In a male, however, the urethra tends to be about 8 inches long. Not the penis, but the urethra from the internal urethral sphincter all the way to the external urethral orifice is usually averages around 8 inches. Of course, there's variation. And there are 3 sections in 3 different colors here. As it runs between the internal and the external urethral sphincters, it runs through the prostate gland, so it's called the prostatic urethra. And then it runs through the skeletal muscle, and this is called the membranous urethra. And then as it runs through the penis, it's either called the spongy urethra or the penile urethra. And then it opens, the external urethral orifice is at the tip of the penis. Now, the male urethra has double functionality. It, of course, is going to carry urine during the process of urination, but also during the process of ejaculation, it will carry ejaculating semen. But in a typical anatomical and functional physiological male, it's not going to carry both at the same time, because when a male is aroused, one of the first things that happens is the internal urethral sphincter will slam shut, so that urine will not actually move into the urethra when a male is sexually aroused. Okay, and we'll cover that in more detail when we do the reproductive system, which is next. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk to you guys about is the process of micturition. And micturition is the fancy word for urination. So let's just talk a little bit about how that occurs. So how voiding or urination occurs is what you are going to need to do is you're going to have to contract the detrusor muscle, but relax the internal and external urethral sphincters in order to allow for what's called micturition. And this has some voluntary and some involuntary components to it. So basically what happens is as the urine accumulates, it will stretch the wall of the urinary bladder, and that stretch will be sent to the pons. And then the pons will send signals to the parasympathetic neurons to cause contraction of the detrusor muscle in the wall and relaxation of the internal urethral sphincter. This is basically inhibit the sympathetic nervous system that was keeping it closed and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So Then what happens is your somatic nervous system, your voluntary division, gets to decide whether it's a good time to do this. So what happens is if you do not relax your external urethral sphincter, you are not going to urinate. But so if you're in the middle of class, for instance, and this is full, and you actually relax this one, contract the wall of the detrusor muscle, but then your cerebral cortex says this is not a good time to urinate, then it's going to contract that. But the problem is that the urinary bladder is still full, and it's going to continue to give that sensory input to the pons, and then the pons is going to continue to try to make this want to occur. And when you make a conscious decision to urinate, what the somatic nervous system is going to do is it's going to relax the external urethral sphincter. And then, of course, you can use your abdominal muscles as well to cause the urine to move out more quickly. But you could also voluntarily inhibit micturition by saying, oh, somatic nervous system, I want this to stay closed, external urethral sphincter. And then this will work for a little while until the sensory input to the pons is so persistent that it's just going to cause it to override what's going to occur here. And then micturition will occur whether you want it to or not, because you can't hold it forever, because remember, skeletal muscle is not good at maintaining contractions over long periods of time. Okay, that's it.